injuries yet. If there are any, you'll get them first in the WNST Tech service. Let's keep the faith, keep thoughts positive about all things in Owings Mills, at least for a couple of days or a week. Luke will be on the scene out there, and you can always follow along on Twitter as well. All right, baseball. The first-place Orioles headed north of the border to Canada to face some pretty good pitching, pretty hot baseball team. I know the Padres bloodied their nose a little bit as the Orioles had their noses bloodied by the Colorado Rockies. This guy's out in Chicago where all things are coming up roses from the north side. The south side's been a troublesome week out there. He covers Major League Baseball for Bleacher Report. He does cover the whole league, but he lives in Chicago where it's been a little bit of a tumultuous week as well. We welcome one of our defending champions, Seth Gruen, back onto the program. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Seth Gruen. That's Gruen. Like my former tag team partner, Wayne Gruen, back at WITH and WLG in the 1990s. Seth, man, it's been a fascinating couple of weeks for baseball for me after the All-Star game. The Orioles still kind of controlling their own destiny and writing the story. The Nationals in first place down the road. But y'all in Chicago, things have been sort of topsy-turvy. I mean, Chapman on the north side and Sale on the south side, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, starting with the Chris Sale situation, it's bizarre the way he reacted to it. I don't think it's unusual for something so little to sort of throw a starting pitcher off on the day he starts. You hear around the league a lot of starting pitchers say, the 4 days I don't pitch, I'm fine, but you don't want to be around me.
Dude, you did not want to talk to Rick Sutcliffe the day he was taking the ball. You just, I literally, I've been there. I've been the guy that, wanted to crawl in a hole in the ground because, don't talk to the starting pitcher. We know that.
Well, yeah, and few people know this as media members, but we're not permitted to it's a rule that you can't talk to a starting pitcher before his start on the day he starts. And some guys will go as far as not talking the day before their start. So, they're unusual athletes. They're kind of like hockey goalies in that regard. But so, the actual idea that something as little as a jersey might have thrown him off might sound ridiculous to us, and it may in fact be ridiculous, but it's not that unusual. A lot of starting pitchers are like that. The way he responded, though, is what you call into question.
Well, I mean, I said, I think there needs to be some sort of psychiatric evaluation there. I've heard of insubordination, but I've never heard anything like this. And now, meanwhile, we have the trading deadline coming up over the weekend, and he's clearly on the market. Clearly, the price would have been high before the jersey snipping. I don't know that it's going to affect the price, but I do know that in a place like Baltimore, if Mr. Angelos would be dealing 3 major prospects, 3 future Dylan Bundy, Hunter Harvey types, Jonathan Scope types, off for Chris Sale, I don't think the old man here would go for it. You know what I mean? Even though he had some nuts with Sidney Ponson and, a variety of other steroid abusers here, and he did give Albert Bell all the money. We all sort of knew what Albert was about. I think this far along the line for a franchise to invest in Chris Sale, everybody loves Chris Sale, the pitcher. This is one of those stories that you probably don't want on your LinkedIn resume, right?
Yeah, I think most teams are probably willing to throw it under the rug just because he's so talented. And I'll add his deal seems so team-friendly.
Sure.
A little spoiler alert in my list of top available players at this point, Chris Sale's number 2, and that's as much because of his team-friendly deal as it is because of the way he's pitched. In conjunction, the two form an asset that's just incredibly valuable. And quite frankly, the only team that I see having the assets to sway the White Sox to trade Chris Sale is the Rangers, because they're going to have to start a deal that involves Jurickson Profar and Joey Gallo, and even that's not going to be enough. And Joey Gallo right now is a fringe top 10 prospect. We know Jurickson Profar has spent years at top prospect lists and then had the shoulder issues, but has bounced back and played well this year, and they just can't find him at bat. So, when you talk about those two guys, there are very few teams that have 2 prospects who are as talented as those two. So I see the Rangers really as the only suitor. I allow for the idea that I could be surprised or that the Sox could do something or agree to something that maybe we didn't think was possible before. But if Chris Sale goes, I see him departing for the Texas Rangers.
You have a fascinating piece up at Bleacher Report. Folks can check it out over the weekend and find him at Seth Gruen on Twitter as well, about the top 10 prospects at the trading deadline. And you said Chris Sale's too, and I'm thinking, Dude, if Sale's 2, who's 1? Because you can't really do much better, certainly from the Orioles' perspective at this point, than getting any pitcher, to take the ball every fifth day. Maybe Dylan Bundy has become that based on Wednesday's start, but we'll discuss that later. But you have Mike Trout as a trade piece, and I don't hear or see that much, and I'm not even poo-pooing it because I think bold organizations do bold things, but the Mike Trouts don't grow on trees. But then, as we have Manny Machado here, if you're not going to win with him and you're not going to give him $350 million or whatever he thinks his value is at this point, and really it's really kind of up to him, and at this point I would say whatever Scott Boras wants he sort of gets over the last 2 decades in Major League Baseball, and the money is brazenly out there amongst all 25 of the 30 teams now could give Mike Trout a $300 million deal. The question is, who will be the team? Used to just be the Yankees and the Dodgers were the only ones that had money. That's not the truth. But with Trout, what would he bring back? What would a team be willing to give up to win a championship? What would it mean to them? And what would the Angels ever agree to? I don't know that Dan Duquette would ever pick up the phone if someone went in Manny Machado.
It'd be unprecedented. And as I wrote there, trading Mike Trout would represent a giant reset button for an organization that's just bereft of minor league talent. You look, there are actually very few teams that can offer the haul of prospects it would take to pry Mike Trout away from the Angels, but you consider, again, another guy under contract for several more years, and the fact that, look, I understand why the sabermetricians and the analysts say that, he based on his WAR, you'd need to get a certain number of players back that's just impossible to meet, but the reality is, Mike Trout only bats 4 or 5 times a game. So if you're getting back a haul of prospects that includes some position players who can affect the future of your guys, your lineup just looks a whole lot better. Imagine if the Cubs were to have traded, back in the day before they proven them, Chris Bryant, Addison Russell, Kyle Schwarber, and you pick a fourth player for the Angels for Mike Trout. Well, the Angels would look like a lot better roster right now. So,
well, hey, man, I'm an Oriole guy, right? So you're in Chicago. What if the Orioles traded Jake Arrieta, Davies, Rodriguez, the kid that just came up and made a start for the Pirates that they threw in the Travis Snyder? I mean, the Orioles have given away pitchers that would have represented for this team this year probably 400 innings, right? I mean, literally,
exactly.
Right?
That's exactly the point. I mean, these guys can turn into something.
For Scott Feldman.
Right. Well, you look at the Nationals. They've got Lucas Giolito, arguably the number 1 prospect in baseball. Trey Turner they can offer. They have a slew of other top 100 prospects that they can offer. And imagine how Mike Trout would look next to Bryce Harper. That's a pretty formidable 1-2 combination. And you could really use Trout to break up the lefties of Murphy and Harper. That's a pretty tough trip through the middle of an order.
Oh, no doubt about it. Yeah,
there are possibilities, I think, and again, trading Mike Trout if they did it right, and they wouldn't accept such a deal for anything less than a king's ransom, would automatically vault the Angels into the top 10 of minor league rankings.
Well, I mean, we're trying to win at the major league level, and certainly here a lot of teams.
But they're not.
Yeah,
they're
right,
not.
exactly. At this point, you have to decide, am I a realistic contender next year, the year after that? And I think part of the Melvin Upton thing, and Angelo's getting involved, as he did again this week, in changing. That's how it's so hard in Baltimore to judge Dan Duquette or Buck Showalter other than to say, well, they're in first place. Of course, they're doing a great job, but the things that happen along the line really aren't within the power of Dan Duquette to be the ultimate architect, because Upton would be in the lineup tonight if it were Duquette's decision, right? But obviously it gets nixed and everything changes. And, and I'm not to say Duquette deserves more or less respect, and that Angelos it's his money at the end of the day. But that's another thing that happens here over the weekend when the White Sox are going to deal Chris Sale. The owner gets involved in, now who's this kid from Roanoke we're getting, and this kid that pitched at Cal State, Poly Obispo, or whatever the hell. The owners get involved in it at this point because these are Especially with the Yankees, right? I mean, if
Mhm.
Beltran's going to get dealt over the weekend, but if they're going to bust it up a little bit more, that's a business decision and a money decision, even more so than a baseball decision in a lot of cases.
Right, because people won't show up. You're absolutely right. And in the case of Chris Sale, Jerry Reinsdorf is 80-something years old. He doesn't want to go through a rebuild. He wants to see his team compete. And the White Sox formula has been contrary to what a lot of baseball teams are doing. Is the White Sox always feel they're just a few moves away from competing for a playoff spot. And if you're that team and you have Chris Sale and you make the playoffs, man, you're awfully scary because Chris Sale is going to pitch 2 games in a 7-game series at least, and that's halfway to what you need to win it. So, and I take Chris Sale over any pitcher.
You know, the wild card's a conundrum in that way, too, for a lot of teams, because by the time they get to that wild card game, almost inevitably, you're fighting and clawing to the bitter end to become the wild card, usually. I think last year is an exception to that because it was very clear, in the National League anyway, that the teams were all separated. But if you get to that point, you don't even get a chance to put your Chris Sale on the hill for the wild card game if you have to claw. And all of those teams at the bottom this year on both sides appear to be, maybe not in a position to put their best guy out there.
Yeah, I have this conversation. Are you arguing against the wild card, the 1-game playoff?
No. I'm fine with it. I'm saying that there's almost an inherent disadvantage in that game, no matter what, because you're probably not putting your best pitcher on the hill in a 1-game winner take all.
By design. That's why I like it so much. First of all, this is the best for all the mistakes Major League Baseball has made with the All-Star game and other various things. This is probably one of the best things a professional or any sport, taking college too, one of the best things a sport has done for itself. Because number one, it creates so much drama this time of year. Without that 5th wild card, we're not even talking about the Yankees potentially going for a playoff spot. We're not debating whether this guy should be sold or that guy should be sold. It's just it makes these decisions this time of year that much more difficult for executives, and it adds a layer of drama to this whole thing, this huge sort of concept of reality TV that we call sports. Number 2, it makes winning your division much more of an advantage and much more of a reward because, as you said, not only are those wild card teams clawing to the bitter end, and they're not able to set up their pitching staff. But even if they are, they're pitching their top guy, and then the division winner doesn't need to face their top guy in game 1. So obviously, avoiding that game is a tremendous advantage, and I've always felt that the division winner in baseball just doesn't get enough. And this was not only the answer, but this answer had so many sort of unintended benefits, and I love it.
Yeah, I do too. And I think for all of those places like Miami and Pittsburgh that are a little disengaged, hey, if Colorado wins a few more games, we saw them come through here this week. They got great bats. A kid Gray can throw the ball. They got a front-of-the-line guy now. They have a nice little home field advantage to some degree as well. They're going to be playing some doormats as well down the stretch. They look to be getting better. Houston looks to be getting better. Miami, they're getting better. And in places like Kansas City, where it feels like a sell-off season, they're still only 5 games out of it, 6 games out of it on any given day, where they're not going to have a fire sale this weekend either. So the question really becomes, who is going to sell? There's not a lot to be sold unless some of your things in Braun and Trout and maybe player for player, real player for real player, not guy that can rental for prospect, which is what we see this time of year, that people could get creative in trying to make their baseball team better. All of these teams have at least one glaring need, if not 2 or 3, and that's for the division leaders, not for the middle of the pack White Sox kind of teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of those teams you mentioned, they have to decide whether or not they want to be buyers or sellers. The Rockies certainly can get something for Carlos Gonzalez. So again, really interesting conversations this time of year.
Well, and you don't want to be a freezer team, right? You don't want to be in the middle. You either kind of want to buy or sell. I mean, and that's, I mean, even going into the weekend, we don't know that the Yankees are really sellers. They just sort of rented Chapman out. I don't know why they don't bust it up. Oh, but they've been winning baseball games the last 2 weeks somehow.
That's the thing in baseball. You do not want to do nothing this time of year. Championships are won this time of year. Whether you look at what Theo Epstein did when he first took over the Cubs and was able to trade and get prospects that are affecting the team now in a potential championship run, or you make a deadline addition, again, like they did with Aroldis Chapman. Championships are won this time of year. You don't want to be the executive that does nothing, because you'd hate to barely make the playoffs and have done nothing and look back on this time of year and said you could have done something. And simultaneously, if you'd hate to be one of those teams that didn't make the playoffs and maybe feels like they should have become sellers, maybe misses the playoffs by far more than they anticipated and should have become sellers. You have to be active this time of year.
Trading deadline coming on Monday. We got Seth Gruen on the line from Bleacher Report out of the second city, the Windy City of Chicago, where it's been active. We certainly have our own activities up and down the corridor here. The Orioles have been sort of a choppy bunch. I mean, on these nights when they don't hit the ball and they strand runners and they leave the bases loaded and they squeak out a run or two behind a decent start, it really feels like a failed opportunity. When the offense turns off here and when Chris Davis, goes 2 weeks without hitting the baseball, we don't have an explanation for it, other than, give it a day or two, they'll start hitting again. But the pitching has gotten better, even if the results haven't gotten better every night. And the Dylan Bundy thing has become fascinating because every team out there would like to believe their best trading deadline acquisition is someone within their own organization getting better over the last 2 months,
Yeah, look, absolutely. That's also the kind of ways in which you want to see your team improve. And look, it's timely if a guy could get better, but I think sometimes there's also some nuanced deals, some nuanced sort of moves that a general manager makes that maybe isn't sexy, that maybe doesn't even look that great on paper. But the Orioles went and signed Tom Gorzolani to a minor league contract. Now, I don't know when or if he'll be ready for any substantial amount of time, but if he is, look, that's a guy who started. He's not going to start for them, but he's a guy with some relief experience too, and most importantly, a guy who's capable of getting left-handers out. And I think we saw Trevor Cahill have an impact on the Cubs last year, and we'll see potentially what Joe Nathan can do. So, sometimes a smaller move has a huge impact, and you look back and say, hey, that was a move that won us X.
Well, this weekend, it's mano a mano, right? I mean, and I guess we always sort of knew Toronto could hang around. They had the bats. The arms have been better. The Orioles will get the best of their arms all weekend as well. Some thoughts about the Blue Jays and where they are. The Tulowitzki deal last year, the Price deal, the move earlier this week with Upton. They're trying, and they really are kind of, much like the Red Sox with Ortiz, sort of getting to the end of the wheel on a couple of these. They're in it all the way, and this weekend is their chance to sort of seize control the way they did in the middle of the summer last year.
Well, yeah, that vaunted middle of the order, Encarnacion and Batista are all, they become free agents next year. So I think partially the Upton deal was particularly to leverage Batista. This is a team, obviously, that made some big-time moves last year. The Tulowitzki move didn't end up helping him much because he really struggled until he went on the DL, then came off of it, and has looked like the player he was to some degree before, or when he was in a Rockies uniform.
Yeah, and there's your acquisition there, that if you think, well, he'll hit 280 the rest of the way, well, that's a nice addition from where he was struggling with Mendoza and not even in the lineup a month and a half ago, right?
Right, yeah, 100%. And then obviously the price deal was a tremendous one for them last year and helped them make the playoffs. But there isn't a David Price out there this year, at least not amongst the pitching ranks. You could argue that maybe Ryan Braun could have that kind of effect. But the reality is there's not that kind of top-flight pitching out there. And that's why Chris Archer, despite the fact that he's having a terrible year, made my list of the 10 best available. And that's only because every team, the demand for starting pitching, the demand for relief pitching, usually the demand for left-handed power hitting usually doesn't vary year to year, but the supply does. And the supply of starting pitching is really, really low.
Hey, man, I'm an Oriole fan. I would take a flyer on Chris Archer in a minute. I mean, for me, I don't know what the hell happened this year, but I've seen his act, and I think he's a high-integrity guy as well. I don't know how Buck would feel about him or Dan Duquette, but if Chris Archer became available for me, I would take him on and say, we'll give him the ball 30 times next year, and you know what? It'll probably go better than it has with Ubaldo Jimenez or Gallardo or any number of the Kevin Millwoods and the like that have been through here over the last 15 years. Chris Benson,
Yeah, obviously this is the worst year of Chris Archer's career. He's had a couple years where his ERA was close to 3. I agree. I think one of the things he has going for him is that he's under contract for a very, very long time through 2021, I think, and his salary is just extremely low. I mean, if you're able to get a guy who has a 3.2 ERA, can deliver you a quality start, I would say more times than not, let's say 4 out of every 5 starts, that's a tremendous bargain. And even if he doesn't become that player, you're not risking that much simply because you're not paying him that much. It's just a question of what the price will be in prospect.
Yeah, the team options on him through the next few years are, $5 million, $6.5 million, $8 million, $9 million, and $11 million. It's way less than Jimenez and Gallardo and those guys. If you're going to give up a king's ransom, give up a king's ransom for a guy that might make 100 starts here the next 3-4 years. And I see Archer as a guy that would be that. Seth Gruen on the line here. You can find him at Seth Gruen as well as at Bleacher Report, covering all things Major League Baseball. Where are you on the Orioles right now here, heading into the weekend, and thoughts about where these bats are? And we talk about guys like Tulowitzki who could be better in the second half. The Orioles have a handful of guys that couldn't be better in the second half. I don't know that Machado or Scope or Trumbo could possibly be better in the second half or during the last 8 weeks than they were during the first 12 weeks.
Yeah, I'm not going to change my belief in any of the 3 teams in the AL East based on sort of a hair trigger response. Again, I like all 3 to push to October. I'll tell you, if one of either the Blue Jays or the Orioles don't make the playoffs, trust me, it's going to come down to that last week with Houston, and I see whichever 2 don't win the AL East in Houston as creating some real interesting drama for us in October, because I know there's some people who think now the Astros are going to catch the Rangers. I just still see the Rangers pulling out that AL West, and John Daniels is one of the great GMs in the game, and I think he might make some big splashy move that ends up ultimately winning them that division.
Well, he certainly made it last year, right? I mean, he won July 31st, 2015. No doubt about that.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And again, he's one of these guys who the greatest GMs in the game aren't afraid to trade their top prospects. Why? Because they're confident in their ability to go scout and go find the next great one. That's what a great GM does. It's just like a great player, confident in their abilities. And John Daniels is one of those guys. First of all, he's developed and crafted an incredible team this year, but one that's going to, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, one that's going to just compete for years to come when you look at the young players that they've got. So, he's somebody I would trust 100% full stop at this time of year, and I expect him to improve that team.
All right, Seth. Well, take care. Buckle up the seatbelt, and we'll hang on through the trading deadline here and hang on with the Orioles and the Blue Jays in a first versus second place matchup north of the border this weekend. Always appreciate the time. Always good to have you on. We'll be watching your work at Bleacher Report all week.
All right, you got it anytime.
You got it. Seth Gruen on Twitter. That's Gruen. You can find me out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. Download, podcast, listen when you want, where you want, how you want, from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. It's all brought to you by buyatoyota.com and our Audio Vault. Don't forget, The morning newspaper, 7 a.m. each and every morning. It hits your email inbox free of charge, and it's powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month. Still has the big purple facade on the outside, kind of like the Ravens. So get over to Planet Fitness and tell them we sent you over there. See PlanetOfTriumphs.com out on the web for a little inspiration as well. We can all use a little bit of that these days. WNST Tech Service will be breaking any news that would happen in Owings Mills, and Luke is on the scene with all things Ravens out there. I'll be in and out as well from there. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. You can sign up for our tech service, and you will never be out of it. You'll always be the smartest sports fan in your social media group when you're on the WNST Tech Service. All right, nasty at WNST.net reaches me, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.